Still remember them asking me directly, is this the person who killed your father? I said, yes. And then they asked me, I want you to point to the guy who killed your father. I pointed to the guy, and the judge really looking at me, just very concerned and saying, look, I know you're 5 years old. What you say next is going to change the course of this man's life. You know, and I know that's a lot of pressure, but you need to be if there's even a slight bit of doubt, you need to tell me now. Are you sure this man killed your father? And I said, yes. I think he asked me twice.
Friends, welcome to another episode of Culture Conversations. I'm here with my friend Donny Cho from Philadelphia. Donny, thanks for joining me. Appreciate it, brother. And Donny is the lead pastor of Metro Church in Philadelphia. So excited to be here with you this weekend. What a great joy.
Great to be in this and to do this with you. It's awesome.
Thanks, man. Thanks. So, Donny, I want to capture your story. You have such a fascinating story of coming to faith and childhood. I know some ugly things happened in your family early on, and you agreed to share some of that. So could you maybe start from when you were a child, you know, in America and what happened and transpired, and then maybe we could get into your coming to faith and.
Yeah. So I'm the son of Korean immigrants. We weren't intending to stay in the United States for an incredibly long time. If you know anything about immigration, you know, the doors kind of open up for a country, and they tend to bring the college-educated elite culture first. And so I think it's usually like in the order of like 10,000 or something like that. And so we were part of the first real big wave of Korean immigrants into the United States. We settled in Philadelphia for various reasons, and my father was an engineer, my mother was a nurse. And
what year was this roughly?
This was 1973. I was 8 months old. So I was born in Korea, flew here at 8 months, and my father was here. He was contracted or hired by a corporation here, an oil corporation here. We got some big ones here in Philadelphia, and he had developed some engineering practices and some sort of methods that they wanted to apply. So he was here. Like most immigrants, when they settle down, in order to make ends meet while they're kind of setting up their actual careers, if they go that route. Remember, the first round of people are always generally at the cultural or educated elite. And so I think the intent was to go back into my mother and a lot of her friends to this day, actually, even into their older age, they're still practicing in nursing. And so my father was here. Usually what you do is it's standard to bring some money together and purchase a business. So right outside of Temple University, we had a business. I believe it was on Broad and Erie, which is right a big part of North Philly. And what happened was not soon after we had started up the business, I was at school, going to nursery school. We were like 4 or 5 years old. What happened was one day coming out, it must have been kind of calculated because they must have timed it with, my father would make daily bank runs with the cash that was gathered from the business, and we were mugged that day at gunpoint. And what happened was the person got caught. And long story short, you know, during the time of bail, so he came out on bail. And I think his intent was to then track down. There were multiple crimes that he was tied to, and he basically wanted to come down and go after the witnesses, and so including the DA or the ADA at the time in Philadelphia. So my father was victim number one. He came right into the business and shot him in the back of the head, right in front of his coworkers, patrons in the store. I don't think I was that far away. My mother was away. I remember running out to her. I don't even know how I got loose, but I ran out to her telling her what happened to Dad. She came running in, and it was just after that, it was a chaos for like 3 or 4 days. And I was separated from my mom for at least a day or so, probably funeral arrangements and all that kind of stuff. My mom told me my dad held on to his life. Pretty much the back part of his head and brain were exposed. But he was in the hospital just kind of clinging on to life until my mom showed up. When she showed up, they both wept together, and then he passed. Wow. And that was pretty much the early part of the story. We moved out to Canada for a little while just to kind of gather our kind of piece things together after the funeral. We were out there over half a year. I was out in Edmonton, I believe, or Saskatchewan, out in Canada, and the the DA's office called, somehow tracked us down in Canada, and begged us to return for trial because he was. What happened was, after he killed my father, he had committed 2 other crimes, including holding a home hostage in West Philly. And so we're North Philly, he went out to West Philly. He was holding a place hostage. This is all kind of, I think it's just some public record. I read this actually later on. But the ADA ultimately brought me in as a witness. I stood before a judge at the age of 5. I was 5 years old. I remember the judge having me take a look at the guy, the person who was in question. They had who was arrested, and they asked me pointedly. Still remember them asking me directly, "Is this the person who killed your father?" I said yes, and then they asked me, "I want you to point to the guy who killed your father." I pointed to the guy, and the judge, really looking at me, just very concerned and saying, "Look, I know you're 5 years old. What you say next is going to change the course of this man's life." You know, and I know that's a lot of pressure, but you need to be if there's even a slight bit of doubt, you need to tell me now. Are you sure this man killed your father? And I said yes. I think he asked me twice, and that was it. You know, he was on death row, and you know, there were newspaper articles that came out. I remember being in a laundromat with my mom, and we were doing laundry. We were in the city. And the newspaper articles are saying how the girlfriend was going to come after me now.
Oh,
you know,
this is in the paper.
It was like the front page, or it was definitely visible, and it was like just lying out there. The copies of the paper. I remember people asking me in the laundromat, "Is that you?" Because we were looking at the paper and we're just trying to read this thing, and I'm sitting there. I'm like, you know, that's us. My mom is freaking out, and so she pulled us out. Moved out to the burbs, and that's pretty much my stint with the city as a child. I grew up basically in a suburban, you know, apartment for most of my early childhood there, and grew up in Plymouth Meeting. I remember one time we were at a Pizza Hut, and it was such a random thing. To this day, I don't know what to make of it, but we were at a Pizza Hut. And as I went up to the counter to ask for something, and some guy sitting there asked me, you know, "Hey, where's your dad?" And I said, "Oh, he's not here." You know, I was kind of trained to say certain things, so I don't give too much away about our past and our history. And he asked me, he's like, "Was your father murdered in North Philly?"
Wow.
And I remember going back to the table and telling my mom, and she was just like in a panic, you know. So, yeah, a lot of my early childhood, I remember, you know, when you experience something like that, there's a part of you that doesn't really understand everything that's going on, but then there's a part of you that's very clear and cognizant of what's going on. And I think a lot of my, you know, childhood was like running around, making sure the doors were locked every night. And I was the man of the house now, you know, and you kind of take on that responsibility. And you know, I don't know if that's what I attribute it to. I think a lot of my, a lot of my life. I always tell in our congregation, I'm a worrier. You know, not a warrior. I worry a lot. You know, and I wonder if, you know, sometimes I think part of it is probably just a part of my family and life, and but a lot of it's just, you know, trauma and stuff that you've been through, you know. So
how many siblings do you have?
I have 2. My mother remarried. Well, so my biological brother, you know, from the same father, he was less than a year old at the time when this happened. I remember we were carrying his, I guess, car seat thing, and when we got mugged, so he was right there.
So the whole family was there when the mugging happened.
The mugging? No, my mom wasn't there,
Okay.
And my sister hadn't been born yet. My mother remarried when I was about 12.
Okay.
And so, you know, what happened was, but my brother was there. It was just my father, my brother, and myself.
Gotcha.
Yeah, it's wild. You think about these things, and it happened so long ago, and yet these things that happened so many years ago are just such impactful events that changed the course of your life. Really.
Now, are there any other ways you would say that event when you were 5 years old, and then, you know, it continuing to ripple out in things like the Pizza Hut and the laundromat? Do you think there are ways you can discern that it affects you today still?
I can definitely consciously say that there are ways that, you know, I remember, I was set apart from a lot of the other kids, you know, because you're talking 1970s, early 80s, nuclear family and family values were still, I mean, this is the Reagan era, the peak of the Reagan era. So, I mean, family values, the nuclear family was still a very, very prominent, and you know, it was still a novelty to know, I don't know if you call it a novelty, but to know that, hey, this person's family is divorced. That wasn't prevalent or as prevalent as today. I mean, it was starting to happen. But you know, to be able to share, it was difficult for me to share that my father was murdered. You know, it was one of those things where I remember still writing in my college applications, you know, where they ask for your mother's occupation, your father's occupation, and you sit and you write deceased. And it was just it was a foreign word for me, and it was not something that just easily rolled off the tongue. So I didn't have a lot of opportunities to share a story about this until I probably got into high school and college, where you're a lot more open and free to share things, and you have a little bit more freedom to express yourself and to share your story. But I think, you know, it definitely changed the course of our career. I mean, my life. I mean, I think number one, our family never intended to be in the States all this time, you know.
So the plan was always to go back to Korea?
I think the original plan was to go back to Korea, resume their professional careers there. The U.S. being here was they had a great life out there. You know, our entire family, extended family, is still in Korea. And so, you know, but what I've come to realize now, looking back, is that number one, immigration itself is a trauma. It's what you call, in many ways, a positive trauma, because there are certain things about immigration that are common to probably all immigrants. You learn to be a survivor. You learn to be resourceful in a lot of ways. You are different than the people around you or the majority culture around you. You learn particular things, but, you know, just your work ethic, especially that generation, I think these are things that, hey, your parents didn't bring you here and stay here. My mom could have taken us back to Korea, but by then I was almost 6. And I think the language barrier was already there. My ability to understand, read, and write Korean was, I mean, I couldn't read and write.
So you could speak English, write English?
Everything was in English, yeah. And she noticed that I was excelling in my reading as well. In first grade, I was already admitted into the 5th grade library, so I could read more accelerated books and things like that. And I think she saw that and said, you know what, you're a reader, we got to stay here. And so we stayed. So, you know, immigration itself, I think, is a challenge, at least a trauma to the parents. And I think not enough is being said about the first generation culture and the trauma they endure just being here. They made a choice. That's the difference. Right. It's a trauma in many ways. I don't know. I always wonder if they would have made the choice had they known what they would endure, if they would do it all over again. But I think, hey, it's a choice. They chose to be here. And that first generation, they are gritty and resilient and resourceful.
Explain some of that. So I think from outside that world, it's hard to comprehend what is it like experientially to come into a country that's not yours, to a people that are not, you know, your people. I imagine other Koreans were like easily identifiable in a tight community, I imagine.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just unpack some of that for us.
Yeah, so I mean, you know, Asian cultures in general, but you know, particularly Koreans, the goal was to establish yourself here, excel academically, and I think most immigrants, not just Asians, you know, they said that, you know, the Kennedys, for instance, you know, they had their kind of Irish blue-collar mentality when they first came to the States. And, you know, a lot of their history is with moonshining, right, during the Prohibition era. So when they were, you know, but that resourcefulness, whatever you do to make ends meet, to get ahead. And the original Kennedys, their goal was to just, I mean, I think I read this in one of the biographies, but it was very, very explicit that their goal was that we're going to breed. We're going to breed and excel, take all this money and pump it into our children, send them to the best institutions. But that's immigrant thinking, you know, and Asians are very, I mean, you know, there was no other college choice than to go to an Ivy. You know, you had to apply to an Ivy, you had to get into an Ivy. I think they just wanted to make sure that we were going to fit in. That was the way you were going to fit in. You know, the parents already understood we're not going to fit in. We're going to get made fun of every day. we're going to get robbed, sometimes at gunpoint. I mean, in the early 90s, the tensions in the inner city with Asian business owners.
Talking about here in Philadelphia?
In Philadelphia, but across the country. You know, when the LA riots were taking place, there are documentaries that film and capture Korean business owners protecting their businesses like with guns because of all the rioting that was taking place. Yeah, and you know, you didn't see that as much during the riots in 2020. You know, it's a much different culture today.
Yes.
But definitely in the 90s, you didn't have that, and there was a lot of tension there, and that tension is still there, I think. But yeah, you know, you did what that immigrant culture, that lifestyle. You make ends meet. You know, you survive. You're scrappy. You got to be resilient. You got to be gritty. Work hard. You know, I don't really view myself as an intelligent person so much as I just worked really, really hard. I remember staying up till 3, 4 in the morning studying for an exam in 7th grade.
Wow.
You know, and I had that kind of, that's not a work, part of it was kind of, you know, taught to me, like my mom telling me, you got to work hard, you got to do better. Like, you know, you come home with, it's every Asian family knows this. You come home with a 98 and they want to know 2 things. Did anybody get a 99 or 100? And why didn't you get the 100?
Wow.
You know, and that's what they want to know.
Man.
Oh, there was so much pressure to excel, to be, and I was the eldest child of a Korean family, which is already patriarchal by nature, right? And so a lot of pressure placed on you. My mom was different. She didn't have, there weren't 2 parents, so she had to play mom and dad.
Yeah. And
so as much pressure as she wanted to put on her kids, there were also limits to how much she could do.
Sure.
You know, and so, but she definitely instilled a strong work ethic in me, and you saw that every day. My mom would get up at 4:30 in the morning, read her Bible till 5:30.
Wow.
You know, or pray in her little closet until like 5:30, and then she'd get dressed and go to work, and then she'd be at work at 7 in the morning. 6:37 in the morning, and she'd be there till 7 in the evening, lock up, and that she did that 6 days a week, you know. And if you think about,
running her own business?
She ran her own business. Yeah, she started out. So when we came back after the trial, after everything settled down, she got into the floral business.
Okay.
So all her friends stayed in nursing, and some of them are still there doing it, even at older ages. But it's funny because she was she was the teacher. In nursing school, she taught a lot of those guys, but because of her life circumstances, she went into the floral business. She had a little corner shop right by Einstein Hospital in North Philly, and the business did amazing. Eventually, she let that go and started a lot of Korean business owners either went into grocery stores and convenience stores, bodegas, or they went into dry cleaning. And so she took on a small little dry cleaners out in suburban Jersey. This was right around my senior year of high school. And so she picked up, and most of the family moved out to Jersey. I mean, I included. I still commuted to my high school because I had like half a year left. Yeah. And then I was off to college. And they do all this, all their parents, it's just a known thing, a given thing. Even in today's immigrant culture here among Asians, parents come here, they work, and they know that they're sacrificing family and in many ways like the typical, you know, life, you know, pleasures and comforts to just kind of pick up their family and just bring them up just by sheer will. And then what happens is their kids are going to go to college, and they're going to have a chance at assimilating or getting in there, getting part of the mainstream culture. And we're seeing a lot more of that today. But with that, I mean, I think they say that, you know, that mentality is kind of dissipated a little bit. So prior to that, churches were the cultural centers, you know, because it's the one place where you can maintain your language, your history. You find people who come from your part of the country in Korea. You get to worship, and you become. Certainly, there was, you know, evangelism, and people become Christians.
Sure.
But it gets very hazy because it's like how much of it is culturally being brought in as a belonger, and so they're Christian, versus really having a conviction and faith and being a part of just a new immigrant culture here. It gets a little fuzzy, but. you see in the Korean world, because the immigrant culture, all very similar, minus the elite, educated, the doctors and the people who've established themselves, they're going to be working 6 days a week. Kids are part of the latchkey kid generation. I was carrying around a key at the age of 6 and walking to school. I remember, I'm a worrier, so I remember one time I forgot my homework. I was 6, and I couldn't sleep all night, just thinking about this homework assignment that's sitting under my desk. And, all sorts of thoughts, like, what if it's not there? What if I lost it? What if I lost it on the way home? Like, all sorts of, I still remember that. And so at the crack of dawn, I got up, got dressed. My mom was already at work. I left the house, crossed the street, snuck into the school. There were janitors. It was like probably 7:30 in the morning.
No, I mean, you were 6.
I was 6, yeah. And then I did my homework, came outside and just joined in with the recess crowd at about 8:15, and then we got called in, and somebody caught, like, I guess a janitor spotted me, and I got called down to the principal's office, mortified, because back then you could hit your kids, and so you're in a line of kids ready to be disciplined, and you're literally watching like kids get spanked, one down the line, and then got to me, and he sat me down and he said, "I heard you snuck into the school and you crossed the street without the crossing guard. Did you do that?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Did your mom know you did that?" And I said, "No, sir." And he said, "What were you doing?" And I said, "I was doing my homework." And he was like, "Just don't do it again." And then
he's like, "All right, that's a good answer."
He's like, "All right, you had no ill intent,
Man.
But yeah,
you have a 5-year-old. Could you
he's
imagine?
3. Yep.
He's 3. He's 3.
Yeah.
Okay, I have a 5-year-old.
You have a 5-year-old.
I couldn't even imagine my son in a year doing that. Like, I just can't even imagine.
I mean, if you think back to like when we were kids and the kind of freedoms that we had,
no
the
doubt.
crazy stuff, you could probably count on multiple hands how many times you probably shouldn't be here.
Oh, yeah.
And that was
no
one of them. Like, that's a busy road. Plymouth Road is, it's not, it's still a pretty busy road in the burbs. And I remember crossing the street is a wide street, 4 lanes. Just cross the street and you sneak into the school and just like, I remember like.
Did you do good on the assignment? You remember?
I mean, it was like 1st grade or 2nd grade, right? I mean, like, how important was the assignment, But
to you, it was important enough to worry all night and then go to school and get it done?
Yeah, it's like that kind of stuff, right? And I think I attribute that to immigrant, like, grittiness and resilience, the scrappiness. I also remember times when, hey, we couldn't pay the bills. And you had to figure out ways to improvise, and you kind of carry that with you. That's also part of the trauma, of being an immigrant. Today we go to a nice place to eat, and having gone through I've worked in corporate life for 27 years.
Yeah.
So eating at a nice restaurant with my family is not a big deal. You sit down with your family, and my mom would come along, and the first thing they do is they look at the prices. And they say, "I don't want to eat here," and she'll tell you, she used to sit me down and say, "I know you guys, this is all part of the benefits of being, educated and having a career here and stuff like that. But you need to learn to be scrappier and conserve your money, and it's not worth the fine dining. Like you got to hold on to your cash and make sure you save. Like, look at how we grew up," and that's what you're told. And if you think about like Korean immigrants, what do they do in the church? Well, everything happened on Sunday, Wednesday evenings, Sunday all day. I was at church from 8:30 until sometimes 7 in the evening.
Wow.
And all your best friends were in the church.
Because of meals, you probably eat.
You ate meals there. You watch TV there. We'd sneak in and plug in a TV and watch Eagles games there. But why? Because your parents, it was the one day they had.
Yeah.
So they would have choir practice in the morning.
I get it. Yep.
Then they have worship. Then they have some sort of Sunday school or a meeting. Then they have choir practice, maybe a Bible study, and then they come home. And the few times that you stepped out for church reasons would be sometimes you had a Wednesday prayer service. Sunday early morning service. I mean, my mom would come back, feed us breakfast, and then take us to church again. She had Koreans are notorious. They're just it's notorious is the wrong word, but it's famous for early morning prayer sessions that would just go hours and hours and hours, and late night prayer sessions for that matter. And you know, the one thing that they didn't go on mission trips, you know, because they had work.
Sure.
They you know, the business would fall apart if they weren't there a few days. They there was no outreach effort, you know, because they couldn't take part in those kind of things until much later. But the one thing they had was money. And so they gave, they tithed. These churches got very, and I'm not saying that's a bad thing.
Right,
that's
right.
how the church grew,
Yep,
you know.
yep.
And the more you grew, the more land you had, the bigger your building, and the more dynamic and orthodox your pastor was, you know, your church grew. And so yet some of these churches grew to thousands, you know, and that's kind of the
This is
Korean
in the
church.
80s and 90s?
This is the 80s and 90s, yeah. And, you know, I was talking to one of the older, probably the oldest churches here in Philadelphia, that Korean American. He replanted his congregation in the suburbs, and they had this brand new building, tons of parking space, but he had like 250 members at the time. And that's what he started that church, that kind of replant with. And he was telling me that he had to almost instruct members of the church to park in certain areas to make it look more full. And those are the things that he was thinking about as the church continued to grow. He was out there on those tractor lawnmowers. Every week I would go to play basketball. He'd be mowing the lawn.
Wow.
You know, that mentality is just so, yeah, it's kind of bred into you, you know, no matter what profession you were in, you know. And it was great for church planning for me, you know. I mean, being scrappy and resourceful, I feel like that's like a gene, you know, a church plan, part of the church planning gene, you know. So,
you got to be able to take some hits and some losses and get your teeth kicked in and keep going.
And find a way to keep moving forward.
right,
You know,
keep
hey, it's blockage here, let's go right, and let's find another way. And that's kind of how you did it, you know. One of my friends, he was in college, he was Thai, and we would always trade kind of like battle scars, you know, immigrant battle scars. And he said, well, one time, you know, they ran out, they didn't pay their water bill enough. You have to go months of not paying a water bill to get your water shut off.
Right.
And he said they melted snow.
Wow.
You know, they just kept a ton of snow in their tub, and they would just scoop snow and melt the snow. Wow. And whatever gas they had, and they would just heat that up and use that to shower and to wash.
Wow.
You know, I mean, that's kind of a lot of these. I was blown away. I was like, you win. You know, that is like wow to me. But you know, that scrappiness, God uses that stuff.
Amen.
You know, and now some of that stuff staying with you. I mean, I think that's the kind of stuff that stays with you because you don't really process that well. And the downsides of that. I mean, for me, with my father passing. And you know, it's just some of the. It was also a very different America at the time, you know, and so.
In what ways would you say?
You know, we talk a lot about you know, the black-white here, the tension, you know, but you know, Asians. I mean, we were maligned on all fronts, you know, and I don't know how many. You know, my name was never pronounced right. Like all through high school and even part of college. You know?
Did you ever correct anybody?
Oh, every time. You know, but I was Danny Chow for most of elementary school, middle school, and high school. Danny Chow, Danny Choi. You know, and I'm like, you're an English teacher. You're an English teacher.
Right,
like,
on,
yeah, how do you pronounce CHO? You know, but it was kind of like that for a while. It just wasn't part of the. You know, Asians just weren't part of the vernacular. You know, our names, what we ate. You know, kimchi today is probably a delicacy and used in by so many famous chefs around the world. It was actually hailed by Anthony Bourdain and I believe Gordon Ramsay as like one of the top used condiments and stuff, side dishes around the world. But when I was a kid, it smelled bad. It was pickled cabbage, and it was just people just turned their nose against it. You know, like don't put that stuff near me. And it was a very, you know, it just smelled too vinegary. It smelled too this or that. So they, you know, our food was a no-no. You know, our hair. You know, what barber out there could cut our hair? It was too straight, and it grew out. So it's like you needed to go to a Korean hairstylist,
yeah.
You know, or a Korean barber, and. You know, it's amazing to see today K-pop and K-dramas being so popular around the world. you know, but yeah, I mean, it wasn't that long ago, you know, when a lot of this stuff wasn't accepted,
Yeah.
you know, and so, yeah, I think, you know, but all
What year
that's
do you
part of
think
it.
it started to change? When did you notice that, like, this is a different world than I was living in?
Well, I noticed when I was in college, you know, college is amazing because no matter, I had a lot of friends. I grew up in a predominantly white neighborhood, right? And my high school was predominantly white. And, you know, it was predominantly white and Jewish. My Jewish friends would call me Choberg because, you know, I had enough Jewish friends, and I went to Brandeis on top of that, which is a predominantly Jewish, 85% Jewish. Wow. And so they used to call me Chostein and Choberg and stuff like that. But,
messing with you? Or like,
oh yeah, just kidding around. I mean, they were friends of mine, but, you know, I think when I got to college, you realize, number one, there is definitely an Asian subculture, and it was prevalent, and enough that it would now start appearing in movies where they would satirize it or kind of parody it and stuff like that. But you definitely had that Asian subculture, and then you also had Asian food was getting more popular, and college students are much more open-minded. So you go to a place like Boston, and I had Vietnamese for the first time when I was in college, you know, and now it's everywhere, right? And so trying new things, learning new languages, and having friends that are diverse, that really started in college for me. So I would say, like, you know, mid-90s is when you really start to see, like, wow, like it's a different world. The world is flatter, you know, in a lot of ways. And churches and church planting, you know, you look at, I kind of moved out of the Korean church and into a much more diverse type of church planting model. So even in the PCA, our church in Boston was much more diverse. And so I didn't really experience that for the first time until early 2000s.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So.
Well, let's talk about that. So you said your mom went to church early for the prayer services.
Yep.
And you would be there all day.
Yep.
Did you come to Christ at a young age, do you think?
I still remember, when people ask me, when did you become a Christian? I say sometime between the age of 9 and 24. But my first conscious accepting of Jesus as Savior and Lord was at the age of 9.
Okay. Like an altar call or something? Or?
Yeah, no, it wasn't. I don't think it was anything flashy like that. It was more, that happened later. Okay. I mean, I became a Christian every year after that. It was like I went to a camp, and yeah, it was like one of those kind of things, right? But that the first time was at a Sunday school. There was a seminary. She was a med student that took some time off before going to med school and went to seminary at Westminster Seminary. Wow. And she was my Sunday school teacher. She knew piano. She taught songs that were beyond hymns. For the first time I heard, this is Christian music before like CCM got really big. So we're talking people like Johnny Erickson had some albums back in the day. And Evie, I still remember, was another singer. Yeah, she would share these songs with me, make mixtapes for me. There was a lesson that she taught on parable of the sower, which soil, you know, which seed, and under which soil are you, you know, and you know that's where it did it for me, you know. And I remember praying. You pray it wasn't the sinner's prayer, but I remember praying and asking, you know, Jesus to forgive me of my sins, and coming to faith. But it was like I just kind of lived a normal homebody life, you know. I wasn't a bad kid most of my life growing up, but there was a youth camp that I went to every year, and I remember at 18, you know, I was partying a lot, 17, 16. I wasn't doing a lot of bad stuff. I was the guy that drove everyone home, all my bad friends home, but bailing people out of jail, you know, that kind of stuff. But I'd go to these parties and just having fun, you know. But at 18, I was like, you know what, I'm about to go to college, and this is the kind of life I want to live. And so I remember I went to this one camp every year since I was a kid. And there was like an altar call type of thing where, hey, I know this is hard for you, but stand up if you just want to live differently for Jesus. And I just mustered up the courage and I just stood up and I said, it's going to be different from here on in. And that was at 18. I say between the age of 9 and 24, because at 24, that was 1998, I was struggling. I was a leader in the church. I actually headed up the Christian education department of a Korean American. We were the first real second generation Korean American church. Stood alone, apart from its parent church, in the heart of Boston. And I was heading up the Christian education department there. It was a very legalistic, I would say, I mean, today, modern day language, they would say it was an abusive leadership.
Why?
You know? Well, they would shame you if you if you were out of line in any way. So we used to have an early morning service, just like our parental counterparts. The early morning service is at 6:30 or 7, something like that. If you were late, if you didn't wear a tie, or if you weren't dressed properly, if you were late, if you missed it, oh, God forbid you miss it, I was called into the office. And
Like the pastor's office?
Oh, yeah. And
Really?
he would come down hard on you, you know. You were threatened if you, of either losing your position, losing your role. You were threatened if you went against what the leadership of the church wanted.
Wow.
You know, it was a very patriarchal, and they win you to, hey, that's what Presbyterianism is. And so I thought this is Presbyterianism. You know, you're taught to fear your pastors, fear your elders. There was no, and that's when I was starting to like really struggle with, but that's not, we talked about how the Gospel of John is our favorite.
Absolutely.
Me, man, I'm reading this and it's bringing me to life. You're looking at this and all you see is life.
That's right.
You just see Jesus and his just relational character. You see his just love for people, and you see how everything points to the gospel. And I'm sitting here like, but we're preaching on doctrines. Everything was a systematic exercise for our church. So John chapter, John chapter 14 was about justification. Teach on the doctrine of justification, you know. And John chapter 10, you know, I know my sheep teach on predestination, teach on justification. It's not, and those are great doctrines. We stand on those doctrines, and yet it just wasn't life-giving. And I was asking myself a ton of questions as a teacher of, I guess, freshmen and sophomores. And it was sophomores, I think, at the church at the time. And asking myself, how many of these guys are going to grow up to be seniors, and we're going to hail them as people who have grown up in Christian faith, but in reality, they've just grown up in Christian culture, and they're just emotionally maturing like any sophomore to senior out there in the secular world. And my conclusion was, I don't think we're really imparting much.
Wow.
You know, now what they did impart was great doctrine. That doctrine was solidified in me in college. I'm grateful, and I will always be grateful for that. But also came with a lot of baggage. A lot of people were hurt. A lot of people left the church broken.
Now that would be because the culture, right? Like what you would say is the abusive culture,
Absolutely.
not the doctrine.
The doctrine is definitely not abusive.
Yeah.
It was misusing the doctrine in a way to control people.
Really?
The doctrine is, you know, we stand on those doctrines today. But I think it was a very ungracious culture.
Which way? How do you think it was used to abuse people, or
Well, like when you
control people, or whatever?
If you were going against, Scripture was always used in a way to control, you know, to respect your authorities, to respect your leaders, to listen and obey your authority. If you were not, you know, my pastor was saying for a long time, my pastor said, you know, he didn't believe Methodists were believers.
Oh, wow.
Because if you weren't a 5-point Calvinist, there's no way then how can you be a believer? And I mean, it's very systematically and logically driven. So
Belief
you walk
is the
away and you're
work
like,
or
oh
something
yeah.
like that, yeah.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
You know, if you really believe that there's an island of righteousness in you, like Arminius did, and that you just exercise that, then it's all about you. Then are you really coming to faith in Christ? What dependence is there really on Jesus? You know, and it's the other way around. It's you're doing the work, you're coming to faith, and then Jesus opens your heart to receive him. And then they're not really Christians. And again, I understand the arguments there back and forth, but man, it was harsh. And how many people in the college world, they're not all Presbyterians when they walk into that church. They're coming from Methodist backgrounds, they're coming from Baptist backgrounds. Pentecostal and charismatic
Yep.
backgrounds, and they're like, what? Like, so my family, my church, none of those guys are Christians. It was traumatizing, that alone, but there was this way of like, well, if you don't do this, and you then how can you be a Christian? If you don't do this, then you can't be a leader here. You're not a good Christian, you know. And everyone stayed in line, you know. And I was one of the people that helped people stay in line, you know, because I was the guy who was always obedient, always did everything right. I was so for our church and so for everything we believed. But then there was this thing that was happening where it was like, but how do you explain in the Gospel of John, like, look at these people coming to new life, and why is that not happening here? Everyone's dead here, you know? And so I was doing all sorts of stupid stuff, like I would watch Dead Poet Society, and you know, Robin Williams is a great teacher, and I'm like, I want to be this guy. I want to be a great teacher. I want to help inspire and move these guys, but maybe there's something I'm missing here. And so internet was very, very young. You know, I mean, it was very, very infancy stage at the time. There wasn't a lot of content out there. But I was coming to this justification, sanctification. If you reverse it, what happens? The way we're, hey, you're justified, then sanctified. If you're living sanctified and place too much of an emphasis on sanctification and ignore your justification, that's legalism. And I start to kind of reason this stuff out. And I was excited about this, like, hey, I think I'm onto something here. I had a mentor and some friends who were kind of really just kind of massaging this and working with me on this. Took it to our leadership, and they were like, where are you getting this stuff? You know? And I said, well, I did find an article by a man named Tim Keller. And I said, that name is so familiar to me. I had a friend sending me tapes from Tim Keller. I used to listen to those tapes when I was in high school.
Wow.
Yeah, those old Keller, those white Redeemer Presbyterian Church Keller tapes. I popped those in my.
You had to know somebody to get those.
Is that right? Yeah, man. I would get these sent to me. Yeah, and then they were like gold though.
You're right.
But as a Korean American who's listened to used to dynamic, screaming, fire and brimstone type of preaching, I popped that tape in there, listened to it for 10 minutes, and said, this dude is boring. But it was a tape by a Christian man. I couldn't throw it away, so I kept it in a box. And I carried that box around with me all through college, right? Just in case I ever needed it one day. I come across this article called The Centrality of the Gospel. And I said, this is it. And I remember the name. I dug into that box, pulled out all those tapes. And to this day, Matthew chapter 16, that tape, it's like my favorite passage in the Bible.
Is that's the I will build my church.
I will build my church. His rebuke of Peter. Well, his praise of Peter, his affirmation of Peter, his rebuke of Peter. Get behind me, Satan. And then whoever wants to come after me, you know, well, if you want to follow me, take up your cross. And he goes into what it means. This is the Christian life. And the gospel was so explicit. And I said, this is it right here. You know, this article. So I'm sharing the article with friends at church.
What year was this, do you think?
It was it was probably like around 2000.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, my leadership didn't take it to it very well. They thought I was, the way they saw it is, you basically want your pastor to preach like Keller, and you're mad that he's not, which I probably, in my arrogant youth, complaining, Gen X, you know, style and mode, I probably was complaining. He wasn't a very good preacher. But, you know, his response to that was he started preaching in 1 Timothy on the importance of the law.
Oh, man.
You know, so he doubled down, and then the elders doubled down, and essentially they eventually wanted me to leave.
Were you on staff?
I mean, they didn't say that to me. I wasn't on staff.
Okay.
But I was probably one of the top, most visible lay leader at the time. I was almost 30, and I was in my mid to late 20s now. Still young. I mean, what did I know back then?
Right.
I was immature and stupid too, you know. And, you know, I think, man, that was a humbling experience because I ended up leaving that church after 10 years of being there, 9.5 years. But what the Lord did was I came across a church plant in the PCA at the time. And, you know, I wasn't initially drawn to it, but I was meeting with the pastor on a regular basis. And sure enough, their top core values, gospel, community, and city.
Wow.
And I said, core values, what does that mean? He said, well, this is what you build your church around. Gospel, community, and city. I said, all right, I'm in, you know. and that began the church planting bug.
Wow.
You know, and
That was in the early 2000s?
2001.
Wow.
After visiting like 3 or 4 churches, I attended a Sovereign Grace Church in the meantime. I got to know that was a church plant too.
Is it Philly?
This is in Boston.
Boston.
It's just outside Boston on the way to Providence, Rhode Island, actually. It's about a 45-minute drive from where I lived. I got to know them well enough that Dave Harvey down here was flying up to Cambridge, and they wanted to meet with me to possibly send me to pastor's college.
Wow.
And I was like, that is not what I don't think I'm called to. You know, I don't think that's for me. I'm in corporate. This is my life. This is what I want to do. So I switched out, and you know, I was checking out other churches, and I landed at this church, City Life in Boston. And I was there for about another 2 years. The church started out with like maybe 30, 40 people, and by the time I left, there were over 300.
Wow.
And
It's good in Boston, right?
Man, it was awesome. Yeah, and it was reformed. It was confessional. It was, you know, I didn't know what those things meant at the time, but that's what it is. But it was gospel focused, and you know, there was a world of a difference, just a few blocks away from each other. These 2 churches, and it's a world of a difference.
Wow.
And the sad thing about that first church that I was at, it was the largest, like I said, Korean American church at the time, 2nd generation. It's gone now. It doesn't exist. It died. You know, and there are probably a lot of factors that led to it, but it doesn't exist anymore. You know, and but this church was thriving for a long time, and you know, I still owe a lot to it because I healed there.
Yeah.
And then I came back to Philly, and
What year did you come back to Philly?
came back in 2003 in March.
Okay.
The Ides of March, and I left a little bit. You know, I think I was angry still, really hurt, and I had a lot of mixed like emotions about leaving Boston. And I was coming back for law school to start my, like, I guess the rest of my life. But I'd left behind at least what I thought was like a very robust experience, you know, painful at times, just because I learned a lot, you know. And, you know, back then if you asked me, hey, you know, what did you learn? I would have said, well, I learned what a gospel-centered church is like, and I learned what a gospel-centered, a not gospel-centered church was like, you know. But today I look back and I say, well, you know, I was just a ignorant, you know, arrogant person, you know. I learned what it's like to know the gospel, but not really apply it in every area of my life. And I recognized that, hey, churches can hurt people, you know. I learned that, you know, that in our immigrant culture, especially in our patriarchal model, we just kind of assume a lot, and we don't do a lot of discipline, and there's not a lot of accountability of leadership. And when you put all those things together, you know, well, it's Christ Church,
That's right.
and He's going to refine it and reform it and shape it and change it. I do believe that. But a lot of damage can get done there,
Oh, yeah.
and it gets stagnant. The crowd it's ingrown. It gets ingrown. And that's exactly what that church was. It was ingrown. It was stagnant. They were more interested, I think. Well, what they found most important was to keep their people together and in agreement and aligned to leadership. More so, it was political, more so than it being a spiritually nurturing, worshiping place, you know? And they were blessed with talent. And I realized, like, you could have a lot of talent and competencies. That's where I started to really, it's not really about competencies, it's really more about character.
That's so good.
Yeah, right? And, you know, I'm working on something right now on 1 Samuel 15 and 16 about how we, as church leaders, we get drunk on competent people, especially in church planting, because a person with a couple competencies walks through the door, you're willing to bypass a lot of character flaws.
Because you have so many needs.
You have so many needs, and they are, at the time, willing. It's their ticket to, like, skyrocketing to leadership, and you don't sit there and think about the journey not just where they came from, but the journey with you, the ethos, the culture, what's important. We have a lot. I mean, this is Philadelphia, so you got a lot of Westminster guys here, a lot of biblical guys here. They're all two prominent seminaries, and people come with such preconceived notions of what it takes to be a leader inside a church, any local church. And but most of the things that we're looking for in a leader are not really what makes a leader a good leader. It's about character. And what is it? 1 Samuel 16, you got 8 sons of Jesse. 7 of them are brought to the table. David wasn't even in the mix. He was out with the sheep. And the language, the Hebrew language of Jesse, referring to David when Samuel says, "Is this it?" He goes, "There's him. There's the other guy." They weren't even thinking about David, because the first guy was the one that got Samuel drunk. Samuel, the first guy, he looked at it and he said, "This must be the Lord's anointed."
Tall, good looking.
Tall, handsome. He's a warrior. He must be kingly. But we kind of overlook all the things. Today we do dating that way. We do career choices that way. We do career selections. When you're a manager or a director, that's how you do your hires. Church planning and pastoring, that's how we look for our leaders. That's how we admire people. This whole celebrity pastor thing, that's who we admire. We look for the people who are bright and shiny and flashy and eloquent and competent and maybe even credentialed. And then we wonder why people fall. So
could you give? So you're working on this. Could you give a quick? What's a better way?
So one of the things that I kind of propose in the article that I'm working on right now is like, what if rather than selecting people, that's a very cultural way of looking at forward culture, progressive culture. Hey, elite, educated, skills and gifts. What if you develop a medium where you just have place people into a training room, and there you can assess, much like we do with our church planners, an assessment, who potential leaders could be. Another way we do is we look at our community group leaders and we ask them, on a regular basis, who are people in your community group with outstanding character. And when I say character, I'm not saying good person versus. It's not that David's brothers were bad and he was the only good one. It's that. What does it say at the end of 1 Samuel 16? When he was anointed, the Spirit rushed into his life. And then from that point on, chapter 17, it's Goliath. 18, 19, and 20, it's like he's suffering. He's suffering. He's running from Saul. It all begins after chapter 17. So there's trouble. It's how you deal with adversity, which takes time. It's observing and watching how people handle trouble.
Trials, trouble.
Right? It's more so than like how eloquent you are about like your skills and your gifts and what you know. What about how eloquent you are about your sin? And about, are you repentant?
That's right.
When women ask me, what kind of guy should I look for in the church? I say, how about how repentant they are? Do they have the capacity for repentance? Are they humble? What does it mean to be humble? And so providing an arena and a space that's safe where people can come together and you can just observe, and
it's going to take time.
It takes time. It's absolutely. Time is an equalizer, because anybody can. I'm not saying that people deliberately fake it, but you could be good for a certain period of time. But it's in those moments where you start to see those moments that, like, what matters to a person, and I think that's a much bigger indicator, like idols, of idolatry, potential idolatries, and where their worship lies. And you start with that now. It doesn't mean that competencies don't matter at all.
They matter. Yeah.
They matter.
But if you put too much weight on those and then you ignore or put little weight on character, that's a bad formula.
It should be the other way around.
Yes.
You can train most of that other stuff.
Amen.
If there's a gifting and a knack for something, hey, you can get them. There's so many ways to teach the competency, but discipleship is more about character. And
it takes time. You can't fast track character, right?
That's right.
You can't just will to be this virtuous person.
That's right.
According to scriptural standards. You can't.
That's why you call it fruit. Fruit takes time to grow.
That's right.
you know, and you can have the gospel, and I think we have to discern and not be too hard on people that, hey, that person just needs some time to grow. The gospel's there. Let's see what happens, but it still takes time. It
does.
You know, and I think you know, we're such a, you know, hey, it's logical. I'm educated in theology, therefore I'm the guy you need. I'm the guy you want. Man, you might have great ideas, but I'm looking for people I can trust.
That's right.
They're two different things.
Yeah, and like we were talking in another conversation, you can be educated without the experience and have all the theory and have all the doctrine, and that's good. We don't want to say doctrine is bad. But then when it comes to doing the actual work of ministry, man, is that a whole different thing than the theory.
That's right.
And oftentimes when the trouble and the trial and the storm comes, if that's all you have,
that's right,
it's going to flatten you. It's going to level you.
Yeah, I mean, you can have theory and concept and framework. And I think much like law school or med school or any of these other trade schools, it's going to teach you a framework so that you can think theologically. So when you're a doctor, you can think medically or clinically now. If you're in law school, it's not going to teach you every part of the law, but you can think legally now, right? In business, you can now think with a business framework in mind, you know, strategically. But like when you're in thinking theologically is maybe something. I mean, back in the older days of Westminster Seminary in like the 1930s, it was open to non-believers and agnostics too. Because it was a place where people can come to learn to think theologically with a theological perspective. You know, and it was supposed to even train people who didn't have that. So having that is one thing, but I want to see how you are when you're on the basketball court. You know, how are you when you're not being given roles? You know, when you're just in a community group, do you love people then? Or are you loving people only when you have a role? That's right. You know, because that's not really love. And so it's like so we have training. I think number one, I think every church should have, big or small, should have some sort of residency model, because even church plants, you could use the help. For sure. But if you find somebody with decent character, you can pull them in and now walk with them over 2 or 3 years and train them. They may not plant a church, but they may be an outstanding elder. Absolutely. You know, and those are the kind of things that you know, we lack in our world. You know, even now, I mean, every other great you know, enterprise has like a training or residency model. We're just starting to think that way now in the church. I think it's so needed, and we're behind on that. You know. Agreed.
So let's go back. You're like 30 some years old, and you're coming out of this PCA Korean world where you like seeing law and conformity, and you're now seeing the gospel in a new way, how it's changing you and changing your view. What led you to want to plant a church?
So I came back to Philadelphia, ready to go to law school. I was waiting on one more school to get back to me. And I'm living just outside the city, you know, and I'm like just kind of waiting to hear. I'm consulting in the meantime. And you know, just trying to make some last bit of cash, some spending money, you know, while I'm studying. That was my plan from March till August. And there, I had one of my coworkers lived next door to a famous movie director in Philadelphia, M. Night Shyamalan. And of course, there was an opening. Every Tuesday he would gather his closer friends. He donated a ton of money to his old high school, and he would gather his friends together and play ball every week. He was an avid basketball fan, and they had an opening. One of their guys backed out last minute. They needed a 10th guy, so he knew I played basketball. He brought me in, and that was the end of it. Where I was there every week. I was playing ball with these guys. Many of those guys, most of his friends growing up, I think they were his friends growing up. They were lawyers and partners in firms. And so naturally, hey, I'm planning on going to law school this year. And right off the bat, it wasn't even like, hey, that's great, man. It was like, don't do it. And I'm like, but you're a lawyer. You're a partner. I regret it. You know, they were telling me about the alarming divorce rates and how most of those guys are miserable. They're divorced or getting divorced. They can't take any break. They can't spend time with their kids without thinking about the 10-minute blocks of billable hours that are going by. And it's like, Donny, if that's what you want to do, then this is for you. But I don't even want to do it. It's just too late. And the thing is, and so they were like, I'm like, well, I'm about to like enter into school in August. And they're like, no, don't do it. So I'm talking to friends who are in law school. They're already starting to sense, because they're doing internships, and they're like, it's miserable. So I paused, and I said, you know what? I'm gonna pull out and not do this. I took some time off to think about it, and I never looked back. Wow. I started to meet. I got connected to a few people who really became like spiritual father types to me. One was Dr. Bill Crispin, who was a pretty prominent church planning person here in Philadelphia, but I mean, he's quoted everywhere. He's quoted. He had a huge influence on Keller and his missiology. He had he came alongside Harvey Kahn and all these guys. So he's an urban dude, just really big on church planning. I was on the verge of planning a church with a guy who was like a mentor to me, but he kind of wanted to stay in the Korean world, and he kind of operated that way, and so. I said, man, this could be like that abusive situation all over again if we go the wrong way. So we decided to part ways. And we said, hey, the gospel can go in two different directions now instead of one. Yeah. And so we did that. It was cool. I went from there to, I enrolled in a program called LAMP, which is it was a seminary model that came out of the PCA in Florida. Made its way up to Philadelphia as well. There still exists. It's very vibrant still in Florida, from what I understand. But in Philadelphia, it was a very young ministry. Bill Crispin was starting it. He wanted me to be, rather than go to Westminster, he was like, I think this model will fit you better, because it's cohort style, and it was intensives, cohorts over the course of an entire year. I said, hey, this is all right. I'll do this. I got to meet a lot of cool people there. Some of them who helped kind of, introduce me to Acts 29, actually. Yeah. But that's kind of where I got into church planning. A lot of those guys were church planners, just godly people. And when I was, I was in the PCA at the time under care, and working my way into licensure and then finally ordination. But while I was in licensure, I'd graduated LAMP. I said, hey, it's time to plant a church. I couldn't believe it. I didn't want to go into ministry, but in 2008, I came to two major conclusions. One, I met the person who was going to be my wife
2008.
earlier. Well, we didn't meet in 2008. We met earlier, but we just stayed very close. We have a long story. Just even in our marriage story is a pretty wild story. But we dated. We broke up. We stayed friends, and I came around to the fact that, like, man, this person's the one. And I sought some counsel around that. It was like, we've been trying to tell you this for like 5 years, and then the other thing was, maybe I'm called to plant a church. And so I gathered some people to just pray with me. I didn't expect any of those guys to leave their churches. It was really more, they're good friends of mine from different walks of life. Pray with me. They said, hey, about 5 months in, they said, look, I think you're called to plant a church, brother, and we want to join you.
Wow.
And so in the upper room of my house, we have like a little loft there in my old house. We had about 15 people gathered, and that's where Metro was born.
Wow.
Yeah, and that's how it started. So
what year was that?
That was like 2009-ish, 2009, 2010. In 2010, we formally said, hey, we would be a church, and now we just kind of had to incubate and grow. In 2012, I got the green light from the M&A Church Planning Assessment, which is like the missions arm, Missions to North America, M&A, of the PCA. And I was formally approved by the Philly Presbytery in 2012.
Gotcha.
So all that happened as Metro was launching.
Wow.
And then that's kind of, the rest is history, really. Yeah, it's been a now 11-year journey. Yeah.
And now, post-COVID, you're seeing God move in very spectacular ways.
Yeah, COVID was a shocker for everyone. you know, in 2020, I'm sure you've been through that. Like, I went through 3 months of I was disoriented. Like, what are we doing?
Right.
You know, we pulled everyone out. We stopped our, so my sister got married on like March 15th, I believe. That weekend for sure, that Saturday. That Sunday, we moved all the services online. And we were like, we don't know who's watching, we don't know what to do. And so we created a team of about 8 or 9 men. And we called it the Worship Innovation Team. And we said, let's just try to figure out, let's get our bearings straight here. And we started just meeting to talk about what we can do with the live stream. And these are like hour-long meetings once a week, but they were some of the most fun. It kept me alive, you know.
Sure.
For 3 months, we're just disoriented. But as those months wore down, we're seeing the live stream and like we're just building every week. Like, I got an idea. What if we did this? Hey, I was watching KYW the other day, and I noticed that they do this on their, whenever like they switch the camera or something like that, and we're just kind of throwing new innovations every week. And you know, Tim Shin, you know, our executive pastor, I mean, he was our worship, he was a big part of that. But we had some really, really technically skilled guys who we just kind of walked together over the last several years, and they were just, it was like exciting for me all over again. It was like planning another church.
Yeah.
And so, we didn't know who was watching. We didn't know who was listening. We didn't know anything. I mean, you tracked views, and the views were, I don't know how accurate those things were, but we're like, wow, a lot of people seem to be viewing it. But like the impressions back then, because everybody was online, these things were in the thousands of times, you know? And, you know, today it's not like that. I mean, like we get on, we track impressions today. It's hardly like that, but it was off the charts at the time. But, you know, we were like, we don't know who really, I mean, there's no feedback. So we were trying to get people to provide some feedback. Let us know you're in, chime in on this. So we developed the whole 94,000 thing, and we said, hey, type the word Metro to 94,000, stay connected to us. And that's how we knew, like, new people who were jumping in, but that wasn't very widely used at the time. When we finally started opening up live sessions again, we broke it. We had 30 and 30. We had 2 services at 9:30 and 11, and we just allowed 30 people. You had to register to come in. And then
Philly was pretty strict with meeting.
Oh man, it was
masks.
like, yeah. So
strict.
like we had some partners in the Philly area going through the same stuff. We were kind of dialoguing back and forth. Hey, what are you going to do this time around? And what about masks and stuff like that? We kept the mask mandate up through last year. We had a mask mandate up until early part of 2022.
Wow.
And
the city did too, right?
The city did too.
Yeah.
Once the city lifted it, we kept it optional, and it's optional today. I mean, I think this past week we had like 2 people that were wearing masks, and we respect that.
Sure.
We didn't have a lot of issue around, hey, you're imposing on my rights or anything like that. This is a city. If you want to worship here, you know, this is what we do. You know, but a flood of people came in, you know, and they started coming in. They liked a couple things. They liked the fact that we were still engaged with the city, even though nobody was watching. They liked the fact that, especially Gen Z folks. Secondly, they liked, and we were very connected to the community. Our worship model continued to improve every week on the live stream for months, you know. So we were engaging with them. We had a 30-minute, kind of like a talk show thing afterwards. Like we called it The Gathering. And it was a place where it started because it was like, there was no fellowship time anymore. So what do these guys do when worship is over?
Right.
They just close their laptops or who knows what they're doing.
Right.
So we said, well, what if we did like a post-worship, kind of like a wind down spot, you know? So we started 2 things. We started a 15-minute, what we call the prelude, which was like 2 hosts talking and bantering while they talk about announcements and current events going on in the church. And then at the close of worship, we had this thing called The Gathering, where you can type in a question, and we just have a row of questions. You can vote on the question that if there's a pre-existing one, you can vote on it, and then I'll answer it. And they're usually personal questions, things about me. It was just an opportunity for me to connect with people.
Sure.
And so there, you know, who's your favorite basketball player or basketball team or whatever, all time? Who's better, LeBron or Michael? But then it was like stuff like, why did you as a church decide to do this? How do you view the mask mandate? And it was this place where I could just kind of pontificate and just talk.
This is live stream.
It was live stream. It was live, recorded. And I think like people felt connected. You know, I don't know how many people chimed in, but to this day, people come up to me and they're like, we came because of this one answer you gave was just such a reasonable answer. I'm like, really? It was like off the cuff. They're like, we just thought it was such a reasonable, straightforward, and yet direct answer. And we just wanted to see what the church was about. Like something like that, you know, as simple as that. But we just, you know, 30 minutes every week. We did that up until last year. Then we now moved it, to once a month. And then we just cut it off like pretty recently, like before the summer, I think we stopped doing it altogether. You know, but man, the live stream was awesome, you know, in a sense that even though we didn't know who was watching, it was, it just got the creative juices flowing. During that time, we made about, I think we counted 12 to 15 strategic decisions that we made in the moment as a team. And, you know, I don't know if I guess you could say it was the right decision, but what happened was after everything kind of wound down, more people came to the church, you know, and I think we were positioning ourselves. What a lot of people were, they were just waiting for the pandemic to be over, so we could just do in-person services again. And, you know, we took it as, well, what if we were to just build another congregation? And what if that congregation just persisted? And it became a gateway, a pipeline for people to come into the church. People who are kind of hesitant about coming back to the church. 80% of our church consists of de-churched people, so it would be logical that they would check out a live stream first before they come in, and that's what it's become. You know, and so just another way to connect with our people out there. You know, and yeah, so that's kind of, you know, the Lord's been doing a lot there. We've got 4 congregations. Well, we're on the verge of 4 congregations. We have 2 sites, 2 campuses, an online virtual congregation that is very alive and well. And now we're about to launch another service, and we're praying about another site next. So the Lord's doing a lot.
God's moving.
Yeah, God's really moving. We got to meet wonderful partners and friends, and we're learning and wanting to learn and just continue. I mean, you know, First Samuel 16 resonates a lot with me because I think if you put me in a lineup of 10 other guys that are pastors, I'd be the last one chosen every time. And that doesn't upset me, you know, because I think that follows through with the course of biblical history, that he had no majesty that would attract us to them. Right, yeah. And my goal isn't to win a popularity contest, you know. I actually fought church planning with tooth and nail. I argued with God over this. And I lost. Here I am, and I found that God works through broken people, sinful, broken people, and He works through the actual brokenness to bring about, you know, a greater joy and a greater salvation. And we look at Jesus, the ultimately broken, you know, in the most broken way to bring about the ultimate salvation for His people. And I look at that and I say, you know what? I think I can live in the weakness, you know, and in the obscurity, and like you know, it's given us the freedom. For 30 years, I ran a camp. Nobody cared, you know. Nobody cared. The kids cared.
What was it? Was it a ministry camp? Was it a summer camp? What was it?
It was a summer Christian camp that was founded on we just wanted to just bring the centrality of the gospel to children and youth. And we said, what if we did camp differently? And we did this for 30 years. So after 1998, when the gospel started to crystallize for me, we kind of shifted our training program for our counselors to become more and more gospel-centric. And the influence of Keller and some of these other great ones that we could rely on and depend on. But we had a really innovative program. We did it every year up until the year of the pandemic. Wow. We're going to restart it again probably in the next year or so.
How many kids would come through in the summer?
We cap it 2 weeks. Each week, 100 people.
Wow.
And we capped it every year, and every year we would. It was wild what would happen, because we would release the announcement on Twitter or something that registrations are up, and then 2 days later we'd have to shut it down. It's full, done. And it was one of those things where then parents are petitioning and like, oh, we missed a cut by like a day. Can we get in? And we're like, sorry, man. Like, you know, we just have so many beds and so much room and so much space, but. You know, a lot of the counselors there I walked with for 20 plus years.
Tim was one of them, right?
Tim was one of them, yeah. And, you know, through that we learned a lot about, you live in obscurity. I mean, nobody's gonna look at that and say that's a ministry that you're gonna become a celebrity someday. And so, but you see the impact of what the gospel just being planted in a child can do. And it's like a seed, and you see that, and you say, man, this is what I want to be a part of.
This is what ministry is really about.
This is it. With all the hardships, and there's always hardships.
Oh, yeah.
But you embrace that, and we said, hey, church is going to be the same way. If we could fly under the radar and just continue to build, and at the end of the day, look at our body of work and know that God has done a lot through our people and through our leaders, then what do we care how many people showed up? And as long as God's going to provide, and people are going to, as long as it's a ministry that's effective, that people are coming to faith and people are being renewed, then what are we worried about? That's going to be the joy, and it's been that way, for us, and our culture has been that way. I don't think we've ever sat there and said we need to hit certain targets or get certain numbers, and it's just let's just see what the Lord's going to do, and that's kind of where we are. And I think when you let go of that ministerial drivenness pressure to succeed, whatever your definition of success is, and you're just submitted to what God is calling you to, and you're just faithful in doing that. Hey, some people, they may have a mega church at the end of the day, and maybe they're built for that. Sure. I'm just that grinder. I'm just going to study till 4 a.m. I'm just going to keep going, and the outcome will be what it is.
Will be what God wants it to be.
That's right.
Well, brother, I want to encourage you. I had the privilege of preaching yesterday, and man, I got up there and I looked out, and your balcony was full of people. Every seat was full. There was people standing in the back, people sitting against the wall, and even as we left, Tim has a good way of just plowing through the crowd like the Red Sea parting. We just followed him, and man, there was people hanging out in the hallway, and then down the second hallway, and then in the bottom, and I'm like, this is crazy. This is a half hour after, and everyone's still hanging out.
Just hanging out.
Just kicking it. And it was the same way at your Cherry Hill site. Everyone stayed.
Yeah.
It's amazing. Yeah. Like, people are fellowshipping. They're clearly relationally engaged. Yeah. And man, they were responsive to the gospel, which is so encouraging.
Praise God. Honestly, I mean, like, that is what an amazing, like, I mean, I'll tell you one thing that I prayed for that I was disappointed about in ministry when I first started at Metro. One of my mentors, we had lunch about 3 months in, and he said, Donny, any disappointments? And I said, well, I want it to be more diverse. I'm done with the Asian thing, and I was just hoping it would be more diverse. We initially had a much more diverse worship team, and now we have like 3 teams or 4 teams. I don't know how many teams in yet, and diversity is kind of spread out. But I said, man, I just wish it was more diverse, but Asians are just coming, and that's not what I expected. I thought it was going to be a little bit more diverse than that. And he rebuked me. He said, what do you care what color they are? What should matter is that you're doing something that no other Asian church in the area is doing. You're getting people who've never been to church. And they're coming to faith. Man, he's like, I've seen it. Like, you should be celebrating that. What do you care what color or where they're coming from? And so we let it go. And we said, maybe we'll just call ourselves an Asian church again. We'll just do that again, right? And now we look out, and that percentage of Asians is decreasing. And we're seeing more people from the neighborhood, and just people from all over who are non-Asian coming to, and they're embracing it. And we're looking at it, like, we're saying the Lord has just a funny way of, answering those foolish prayers that you have too, and I just find different things to celebrate.
I don't think there's anything wrong with wanting church to be a certain way. Like, you have a vision for the people that would be there. You have a vision for, the church as a whole. And if you want to have a multicultural, multi-ethnic church, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But it's another thing to be like, all these types of people here,
I was like, oh, this is not. My pastor in Boston that started that church plant, that's like, hundreds of people now. I remember at the pulpit, he said, I don't want a Korean church. And like, 90% of the people there were Asian. And they were like, it became known as the church that's anti-Korean. And he was Korean, you know? And so it was like a faux pas. I remember him telling me, he's like, I'm kicking myself over that. I'm gonna kind of backpedal the next several weeks to kind of cover for that. But he says, because that's not what I meant. What I meant was, I don't want to be that kind of Korean church, you know? And so, you know, it's funny, you know, but we put that, I called it yeah, I don't know why I was so disappointed, you know? I mean, what my mentor was saying, he said he was right, you know? People are coming to faith.
Amen.
And
you're
they're being
fulfilling the Great Commission, man.
Yeah,
you're
and
seeing
that's
people come to Christ.
That's
grow,
right. We're
make
making disciples. That's right. You know, and that is, man, we should be celebrating that every week, right? And so, I'm grateful. It wasn't always robust, but every year that I've been here, the thought of leaving Metro has never crossed my mind. I've been asked or maybe touched base with to see if I would be open to leaving, and I never opened that door ever, even during the darkest times of life, or I mean, 4 miscarriages.
Yeah, man.
You know, just suffered a lot just in leadership, and yet, you know, with all that, you know, this is the place. You know, it's going to be Metro or bust, and the Lord has really just been faithful, and I've always been grateful. You know, it's far cry from the legal industry and law and all that kind of stuff, and you know, I think I would have been very dissatisfied there. Here, with all of its hardships, man, there's nothing like being able to walk with people and seeing people come to life. That is an amazing experience, and I just, you know, it's something I never conceived. I had no expectations around what would happen there. We'll just see what the Lord will do, and here we are. So, yeah, my heart's just filled with a lot of gratitude.
Brother, I just want to encourage you. You encourage me. Your church encourages me. Your leaders encourage me. Brother, your hospitality is hands down the best. You guys have taken care of us. And brother, thank you for doing this podcast. This was fun. I look forward to a next one where we can unpack some theology. But thank you for sharing your story. And is there anything else you'd like to say as we close? Anything come to mind that you'd like to?
And we are encouraged. I think one of the best joys of what we've done here as a church is to be able to establish partnerships with friends. And you don't even think to look outside your window and realize, hey, there's a neighbor over there, you know, and you're one of those for us. And I met you at the cohort a few years back, and I said it back then, actually. And I told our staff, and I said, man, there's a guy that I met at this cohort, and I feel like, you know, there's like a kinship there, like a kindred spirit there. So I'm grateful. I'm grateful for the opportunity. I mean, you're always welcome here, and thank you for welcoming me into your space here. So.
Oh, yeah, brother. Thank you. Thanks for doing this, man.
Grateful.
Love you, brother.
Love you.
All right.